Welcome to the living room where we listen, learn, and live together. I'm your host, Richard Martin. Make yourself right at home. You know, as I look back over my life, I know that I have not arrived at this point without the help and investment of others. It's been said that if you want to change tomorrow, invest in the youth of today. Those persons who invest inspiration, encouragement, and admonition in today's youth are, in my opinion, frontline workers. Dealing with young people is not always easy, but I believe it is always worth it. And our special guest is on the front lines, shaping, molding, and nurturing the present and next generation. He's a friend of mine, and I have no doubt that as we have this conversation, you will be inspired. Please welcome to the living room, Mr. Anthony Bolden Jr. What's up, brother?
How you doing, man?
It's
I don't
good.
get to hear the junior all the time.
I know I saw it on your Instagram page. I was like, I don't even think I knew him as Anthony Bolden Jr.
I think this looks good. I always put my full name. My wife says I'm doing too much. So I put Anthony James Bolden Jr.,
Yeah.
but I never say it, so it feels good to hear.
Yes, indeed, man. So here we are. Listen, you have been one of the persons who were influential in me even starting this podcast. So allow me to say to
Yes,
you
sir.
personally and publicly, thank you, man. We're here now.
Listen, man, I'm just really grateful. I knew, and this is really just a tribute to who you are. I knew that whatever you came up with, it was going to be good. It was going to be dope. So when you first dropped like the theme, if you would, of the podcast, the living room, I was like, he's on to something. This is good. This is good.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. You were kind enough to have me as one of your guests for the Bolden podcast, which we will talk about a little later. And so listening to you, guys like Pierre Quinn, Robert Kennedy III, and then others that I don't know, the Rich Roll podcast, Tim Ferriss, and I can go on. Podcasting, as Justin Pierre says, it's not too late to get on the game.
Never.
And so for me, I know I've always loved to have conversations. And I'm sure you can relate. There have been conversations I've had as far back as high school, at the end of which you say, man, I wish that was recorded. You know, there was so many jewels dropped, wisdom exchange, or things you just wanted to remember. And so I'm glad to be in the great college of podcasters like yourself. And I'm grateful to have this conversation with you. I want to begin with this question, man. If you had to summarize, as we are in this new year, if you had to summarize 2020 in one word, as challenging as that might be, for you, what would that one word be?
Man, one word. I think it's like refocus. Yeah, refocus. Can I expound?
Please.
Because the one word is challenging. I think this year has been both a huge blessing at the beginning. Me and my wife were able to purchase a home. We both got new jobs, salary increases, all of those things. And the first half of the year, we kept saying, so many people are losing, but the Lord continues to bless us, right? And he's giving us his favor. We didn't really understand it. We were grateful nonetheless. But there was something else happening on the undercurrent of all of those great opportunities. And that was a slowing down of our lives. That was a settling into our life, if you would. I think, especially as a younger professional, you're always on the move and you're always thinking about what's next and what I got to do. And we finally got to this place where there was nothing else to do, right? Like, we are here. This is it. And that was different. And then the latter half of the year, or these last 3 months, I think have been probably my greatest trial. I lost my father. And I think losing my dad, as tragic as that was, also helped me gain like a deeper appreciation for my siblings, who I don't think that I appreciated as much or was intentional enough in our relationship. But now, like, everybody gets to that December month and you start looking back or looking things over. And I think I'm going into 2020 a different person, with a new vision, with just new eyes, a different perspective on God, a different perspective on myself, a different perspective on my place in the world. So yeah, I think it all kind of finds itself in this refocusing that still working on, but I think it's happened a bit here in 2020.
Amen. Our condolences are still very much with you and your family.
I appreciate that.
Loss is always heavy and difficult, but I think we all understand, even it's almost an unspoken understanding, how much more grief-filled loss in 2020 is and
Yeah.
has been. Um, so not only do I appreciate you sharing that candidly, but also how even out of the pain, there was another aspect of refocusing, leaning in towards my relationships with my siblings. I don't know if you can relate to this, but as we grow older, I always tell people we're not old, we're just getting older.
Yeah.
And our perspectives on life kind of began to develop and mature. As you mentioned, relationships with siblings, like those themselves go through seasons. There were the days when we were just younger, teasing one another, picking on one another.
Yeah.
But now we even look at those sibling relationships with the degree of like, okay, life is precious and delicate. It's not guaranteed. Let me pick up the phone and make the call or send the text message. Can you resonate with that at all? You know?
Yeah, I mean, listen, not having my dad around, my brain automatically. So my mom and dad weren't married, right? So you have these two separate worlds. So my mom and dad share three kids. My brother, I'm the oldest for both of them, and I have two younger siblings. But my dad also has four other children. Four, yeah. So he has seven kids in total.
Mhm.
And growing up, obviously I have semi close relationship with my brothers, Darius and Travis. But on my dad's side, I would only see my siblings when I went to see him.
Right.
And when he passed, I started to think about having a younger sibling. He's the youngest out of all of us, and he's a senior in high school. He's about to graduate, and I was watching. I don't know if I was watching TV or something came on, and it was just talking about how this person has to become almost like the father figure,
Wow.
and kind of help them navigate it. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, man, if I don't do it, who's going to be there, right? Who's going to show wisdom? And I carry the burden of being the oldest sibling, but I think God has also, in comparison to my siblings, blessed me with a lot of rich experiences that deserve to be shared. So now it's like, it's not just, hey, I'm in town, like, let's go to the mall or something. Now it's like,
Right.
hey, I know you are about to go to college. Like,
Right.
what did dad talk to you about? What have you done? You need to get a license.
Yeah.
Has anybody taught you how to drive? So it's like it just goes on a deeper level for me. And with all of us being grown now, it's like some of them are in relationships, some of them have kids. So the conversations are different. And in many ways, I feel like I'm catching up, like
Okay.
learning how to be the active older brother instead of kind of passively just popping in, checking in, because you always think they're all right. They're gonna figure it
Yeah.
out. But my sister, she's what, 22, 23. She just had a baby. And I'm just like, wow, I don't even have a child. So I
Yeah.
don't know, things are different, but it's exciting too. And I think like, if you can embrace that, with relationships with your siblings, I think that's how they remain, because those type of relationships can also fade, right? Like, you can have a sibling, doesn't mean you have to be close to them. But I think if you embrace the changes and understand that just like your siblings are not the same person or people that they were when they were sharing the bed with you or in
Right.
diapers with you, right? Then I think that's where the closeness remains.
Yeah. That's wisdom. That's wisdom. I didn't always recognize that when it comes to the seasons of relationships, and I've heard that language before, but often in applying to friendships, friends come and friends go. But those with whom you share blood, you just think, well, by virtue of that, we're always going to be in close proximity,
Yeah.
and by extension, close relationships. But that's not necessarily the case. And these seasons of transition, they're delicate, and they could use wisdom like that, acknowledging the changes in other persons. And I've learned just patience with each other,
Yeah.
right? Because just as much as we're in that place of great investment, we're investing in our marriages, we're investing in our careers, we're investing in the lives of others. At times it's easy just to kind of keep those relationships on the periphery of life. Whereas I think you're right, whenever we experience the pain of loss, and it doesn't take that to do it, but
Yeah.
that definitely does allow us to say, wait a minute, let's take a few steps back, or let's pause where we are and say, hey, if we're going to go the distance, I want us to navigate this transition in a healthy way.
Yeah. If I could say one more thing too, I think, you know, you're an elder sibling, right? Just like myself. And one of the mistakes I think I used to make with my younger siblings was I used to assume that they were experiencing our experiences the same, right?
Wow.
So like
Mm,
when
mm,
mom and dad got in an argument, as the older brother, I just knew, they both annoyed because they worked all day, right? Like they'll get over it. But maybe my younger brother experienced that very differently.
mm.
And as an adult now, and we'll sit down, we'll rap, we'll talk about life, and I'll listen to their perspectives of like our childhood, or our family structure, or whatever the dynamics at home. And sometimes I'll catch myself saying, that's what you thought, or is that how you really see it? And it just helped me appreciate that we don't see the world the same, even though we went to the same church, we went to the same Pathfinder group, we played on the same basketball team, we did all those things together, but we still kind of left home very different people with a different value system, a different
Mm.
character. And as an elder sibling, I think I've had to learn how to appreciate who they've become, right? And that they don't have to be little Anthony's or versions of myself, but they can be who they are. And I have to learn to respect that and understand it, so that when I'm speaking to them, it's informed by my understanding of who they've become as adults.
Yeah. So you and I met, our relationship really developed at Oakwood, but we met before that in
Yeah,
Connecticut,
yeah, we did. I do
um,
remember that.
at Mount Zion. And over time, you and I have had some key conversations at different junctures in both of our lives. In my estimation, I've seen your path to this point to kind of be like a Renaissance path. You are a musician, you're a pastor, you're a speaker, you're a leader, and you've been able to be effective in all of these capacities. So, kind of going back to get us here, how did you gain clarity on your calling? I think many of us, specifically in our generation, that's like the great question, right? What am I supposed to do? What am I here for? And you've had a chance to kind of not just dibble and dabble, but kind of stand a significant amount of time in different arenas in life.
Yeah,
And I think one of the things that has always inspired me about you, whereas a lot of people could say, well, listen, I'm not necessarily going to bet on what I can't see, right? I'm just going to take the traditional path and live it out, at least for the next 15, 20 years. But we know where that goes. A lot of
yeah,
people get down there and say, man, if I go back, I would do things differently. Where you have kind of said, you know what, I might not always see it all. So without going too far ahead, clarity. Speak to us about gaining clarity on your calling. What has that been like for you?
yeah. Man, honestly, I think it's a race that never ends, right? Like it's ever changing. The goalpost is always kind of moving, but
Sure.
um, I will say that it's important that within those seasons of life, you have clarity on what God has called you to do in those moments. For me, my mom always tried to instill in me, especially once I went to Oakwood, that my occupation wasn't necessarily my calling or my purpose. And
Mercy.
yeah, and it was important for her to instill that in me, because though we grew up church, right? I met you in the
Mhm.
Seventh-day Adventist church. My family was very much not like a traditional um, Adventist or Christian family, to say the least. So our approach and our perspectives of our role and place in the subculture that is the Seventh-day Adventist church was just a little bit different than some of my friends. Um, and my thought of going to Oakwood and being a pastor happened very, like, almost halfway through my senior year, or early in my senior year. So it was kind of like I thought you wanted to teach. I thought you wanted to do music. And now I'm telling my parents I'm going down to Alabama to a school that, they don't know much about, to become a pastor. And I think what my mom instilled in me was like, obviously you could do whatever you want to do, right? Like she has one thing I appreciate about her is she has a bold conviction when it comes to faith. She believes that if you say it, you claim it, you hold on to it, you hold God accountable. And I've kind of walked through life in that way. I don't believe that I have to be tied down to something, but that if I feel God leading me somewhere and I have confirmations and convictions in certain areas, then, I'll move forward. But specifically, I think for me, it's all about making sure that I've heard from God. So anytime I'm about to make a drastic change, and I'm not talking about, changing my major necessarily, right? Like I think the biggest change for me recently was going from planning to be a full-time pastor and work in ministry to working in a nonprofit space. And one of the things that was key to me was like, I kept praying that God, I don't want to like lead myself astray, right? And I know we say it as a cliche, but like when I say that, I mean like your bold ideas are good ideas sometimes, but like every good idea is not like a God idea. It's not what God wants you to do with your life, or at least the way that I shape my life. And my prayer kept being, Lord, I see this and I'm thinking about it every day, but I really need to know. And I think during that time, what God did for me was through prayer. And I tell people all the time, if you really want to know, pray. I think prayer allows you to strip away what is you versus what is God. Yeah. Because just think about what prayer is in essence, right? Like we pray to an unseen God, and who for some people he's spoken to you in your spirit, or spoken through scripture, or whatever the case may be. But many times you are speaking and listening to yourself speak, right? And examining your own heart as you have this conversation daily. And it was through that, it took me a year to make this transition. It was through that daily examination of this prayer that I started to recognize what was vain in my request and what I kept feeling was guttural, right? Like God-given. So I don't know how, I can't really answer it for sure, like how I've gained clarity. I think I've really more gained conviction on what I say I want to do. And then I just go, right? Like, and if I fail, I fail. Like I'm glad Gary V, who may not be like the greatest Christian counterpoint, but due to his language, but I still appreciate what he offers, right? Gary V would always say like, hey man, I think he's like early 50s. He was like, you could do whatever you want for the next 15 years, right? You're 35. So let's say from 20 to 35, you're just trying stuff out and fail at all of it. You're still 35 years old and can still put the pieces together and build a life of greatness, right? Of success. And I think when you approach it with that type of audacity, you can't fail. I think it's like when you got that 1 foot in, 1 foot out, that's where it gets shaky. You just kind of have to go, be convicted and trusting that God, you told me to do this, so you have to make sure I succeed. And I could go on and on and on about like how I practically lived that out, like when I made it to those spaces. But maybe we'll get there. I don't want to go too far.
But I've seen it, everything that you've shared. And for me, it's very profound, right? That at times what we're trying to gain is clarity, but how you kind of pivoted and said, I won't always gain clarity, but the lack of clarity doesn't mean I haven't gained conviction, right? And for me, that's part and parcel of a life of faith. And if a person is listening and they don't consider themselves to necessarily be like a person of faith, just a life of risk and decision making requires that, hey, I might not always have clarity, but I can have conviction. So for those who just might not get it, right, like in pastoring, sometimes it's easy to pivot and transition out, like if your sense of what it is not fulfilled, or your expectations. So many persons have felt that temptation, when they get thrown, as we say proverbially, to the sticks. I didn't ever imagine living in the backwoods of nowhere and, having to speak to 1.5 persons and, both of them are asleep, all that, right? And so you're just saying, man, I've gone to school, I've endured Greek and Hebrew, and I can't get one amen, right? All of that. But for you, and the reason I'm saying this is because I think it further helps us to really situate what you're saying in theory about your own personal experience, right? That wasn't necessarily your case. You had the chance to pastor with, a premier pastoral team at a flagship institution that comes with visibility, notoriety, and you weren't, for all intents and purposes, kind of sequestered, right? You were,
Mm-hmm.
an every weekend face and voice, right?
Yeah.
There are countless persons who, if having had that opportunity or being in that position, they'd have been like, there's no way in the world I am going to transition out of this without a certain amount of clarity. I only give that backdrop so as to say, even then, right, there are times where the conviction is so heavy that you have to pursue a path away from what others might seem to say, hey, wait, what are you doing? Why are you leaving this to do that, to go there? And that's not always easy, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we think, oh, this must be God because I don't even want to be where I am. But at times, God is saying what he's saying, and you actually might want to stay where you are.
Yeah.
Or what can even be of greater weight is other people are saying, don't do this, don't do this. So how do you still move in conviction when the crowd or the gallery is saying, think twice, think 3 times, think 4 times? Or some people might even just be saying, no, there's no way in the world you should do this. I've seen you do that in your life, and I want you to help us, if you can. How do you get to that point where even against the voices of influential friends, you say, I still got to go this way?
Yeah, I mean, wow, you're hitting the nail. It's like the story verbatim. So let me just kind of help paint a picture, right? You're right. I was at Oakwood Church. I remember I sat Dr. Bird down, who's the pastor of the Oakwood University Church. I sat him down in September of 2017. I said, hey, Doc, this is what I'm feeling. And Dr. Bird and I have built a genuine friendship by this time. And I think he sees me as a protege, a mentee. He understands where I come from. And I remember before I had the conversation, I was so stressed. I called my mom. I had 2 moms. So though my mom was married by this time, I still called my other mom. I was like, I need all the advice I can get. And they both kept saying the same thing, right? Like, if God is telling you, then God is also going to show him.
Wow.
For me, it started with, I think it's one key conversations, right? So I went to Dr. Bird, had this conversation, and his first response wasn't no. His first response was, I hear you. I will support you with whatever you decide, but I want you to take your time and be sure. Wow. So in that moment, he asked me for a year to stay 1 more year and just see. In that moment, I told him, I don't know if I can do that, but I will keep you updated throughout the entire process. Sure. Ultimately, it took a year. So God knew what he was going to do. I had conversations, as you said, with some of my best friends in the world who are themselves pastors, who I look up to, and they all told me, bro, you're crazy. I was kind of almost at my time to end at Oakwood Church. And I thought I was going to be up in, as you say, in Mississippi in the sticks. Right. But there were 2 opportunities that had presented themselves before a job offer came that were not in the sticks, that were great transition points. And all through those moments, I kept doing different things. Like, I would, on a very practical level, I would say, you know what? I'm just not going to think about finding a job. I'm not going to apply anymore. I'm just going to try to focus in. And as I'm just trying to keep my head down and do the work, I would find myself back thinking about this. For me, it was like what I could do in the youth development space. I just kept finding myself coming back to it. And to me, that is the practicality of it, right? That if you try with all that you have to stop thinking about it, if you try to tell yourself to give up on the dream, but for some reason that thing just keeps coming back to you, you keep thinking about it when you wake up, it's in your gut, you find yourself on your laptop looking at it while you're still working, then there may be some evidence there that what you are feeling has not just been manufactured by yourself, but it's been placed there by God. I remember there was this speech that Denzel Washington gave, and he was like, basically, the desires of your heart are desires that are put there by God. So one, I think you have to accept that if you're feeling something, that it's not just you, right? Like that God gives dreams. He is the one that like gives us inspiration. So you have to honor what he's putting in you. Sometimes many of us should have gone a long time ago. And it's been in our heart for years, but because we're so afraid of the unknowns, we don't go for it, right? So I think just making sure you check that. Like if you can forget about it after 6 months, if somebody comes and you have a conversation with you and they tell you all the things that could go wrong, and you're like, yeah, and you stop thinking about it, you don't want to do it anymore, then it probably wasn't something you should, you need to completely change your life over. But even after the conversations that, you go through the risk, you go through everything that could go wrong, you have those conversations with important people in your life, and you still find yourself at the precipice thinking about jumping off, then you probably should jump. And the likeliness is that if you jump, you may fall for a little bit, but if you're supposed to be there, you're gonna fly, right? Like you'll eventually begin to take off. And that was me. I believe that wise decisions are made in a multitude of counsel, right? I think I said that right. That's what scripture says. So during that year, I spent time talking to anybody that I thought was somebody in my life that knew me and knew my heart. And we had every conversation about the subject, and I still ended up back at this, right? And for me, I'll share this last story. I got a call from a church. This was the true test, and I really felt like this was God testing me, because right after this call, did the job finally come? I got a call from a church, and I went to Dr. Bird and I said, yo, this church just called me to become their senior pastor. And he looked at me and said, this is an amazing opportunity, right? For you to go from here to not having a district to pastoring it, as a college town. Anthony, this is a good move for you. He was like, are you sure? He kept asking me, are you sure you don't want to pastor? And I said, I don't know. I need to go back and pray. And I talked to my wife, and she was the one praying with me every day. And she said, is this in line with what you feel like God has been telling you? I said, I don't know. I want us to pray for 2 days. And we prayed, and I just did not feel convicted to take it. So I kept saying to her, I think this is the test. I really think that God is testing me to see if what I keep telling folks I think I want to do is really what I want to do. And I called that pastor, that conference official, and I told him, hey, I can't do it. I think about 2 weeks later, Rich, I got a call to come to Chicago and work. And for people who don't know my story, I was working as a pastor in Huntsville, Alabama. I felt God tell me to move to Chicago, Illinois, and work in a youth development space within a nonprofit. It was a very specific prayer. And right after that, it all lined up. And I mean, to me, it was just like, okay, this is where he's taking me. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I hope through me kind of sharing my process, somebody got something out of that.
No, you definitely answered the question, and you provided necessary context for us to be able to reflect on your answer. Because I think that, again, when it comes to discerning the will of God, gaining clarity and conviction, that often is wrapped up in the daily transactions of life. In the meaningful relationships of our spheres, right? Like you said, we lend our ear, appealing for wise counsel from both of our mothers, from our friends, from our colleagues, from our supervisors, right? And of course, those listening will be able to apply it in their own arenas, the principles that we're talking about. So you definitely hit us where we needed to be hit in terms of, hey, it's not always going to have all the pieces could be there, but they might not always be positioned at the right time. And one of the things that you didn't say specifically, but that I felt was this need for patience, right? Dr. Bird says, hey, can you take a year? At that point, you couldn't commit right out, but it still ended up taking a year. But that year was not wasted. That year, I mean, on one hand, you're still getting practice, more and more iterations of leadership in the capacity where you are. One of the things that I loved about you there was that I think you really modeled how to be effective in what one author calls leading from the second chair, right? Which I think for some people, they don't realize that is just as much a gift as leading from the first chair, right? Because, listening to the vision and seeing to how do I fit? How does my gifting and creativity fit there? And so here you are now, you transition from Huntsville to the Windy City. What are you doing now? And how is this a further expression of the call that is still on your life?
Yeah. Man, first of all, what you just said is so true. I could go on and on about that patience and the time that it takes to prepare for what God is trying to take you
Yeah.
to. But I do just want to say that I think what Bird was able to recognize in his wisdom was, yes, you can do this, but there's still some lessons you need to learn before you
Right.
go. And there was so much learned in that preparation process. But in Chicago now, so let me just give a small little backdrop. I am a very inner city kid. I tell people I'm unchurched, but that's not necessarily true. I mean, church was always in my life. It's just our family was just so untraditional.
Yeah.
I grew up in the hood, right? Did the little gang thing for a little bit. Tried to sell drugs in high
Right.
school, tried to sell weed to people. That was not for me.
It didn't
But
work.
yeah, no, it didn't work, right? And God caught my heart my junior year, and I'm so grateful that He did.
Hmm.
That really kind of helped get me to where I needed to go. However, there are some key people in my life during those troubled high school years, from like freshman to junior year, that helped save my life. To be honest,
Wow.
an Italian teacher named Mr. Rienzi, who helped me get into Choate Rosemary Hall. That's Choate. Choate Rosemary Hall is the #1 boarding school in the United States of America.
Wow.
Some folks who watch the show Power may know that because Tariq went to Choate.
Okay.
But Mr. Rienzi helped me get into Choate for a summer program, 6 weeks, changed my life. Um, and that change has stuck with me all throughout my life, right? Like that change from being this kid who didn't think about college, who wanted to be a rapper, to spending 6 weeks in this posh high school on this campus that looked better than most colleges, and with all these white people and black people and Asians with money. I mean, just really out of my arena, if you would. But being in that space kind of helped me recognize, one, that I had the potential to be successful just like these kids. Two, it just gave me the desire to want to be successful. And then three, I think it just helped me like recognize the type of spaces that I felt like I deserved to be able to move in, right? Like I didn't have to just be in the hood. I could be in the suburbs, I could be at the university, I could be wherever I wanted. So fast forward that to the age of 25, 26, however old I was at that point. And I kept saying, I knew I wanted to make that experience a reality for other students, right? So that informed every career decision. That's why Oakwood was a good fit. I worked with young people, I worked in the community, and I used other gifts and stuff like that as well. But that was always the bedrock. I love helping people find their purpose,
Right.
find the potential, and grow it out of them. I did that with my choir, right? Just building people's potential, like helping them really soak it for all it's worth. Currently, this is my second job in Chicago. So I first transitioned, I was working for an organization called the Partnership to Educate and Advance Kids.
Okay.
We called it PEAK. And PEAK was a smaller mentoring program for high school students. So what we would do was we would take students, we would have cohorts. So we'd take them freshman year, pair about 40 of them with highly successful professionals throughout the city. So lawyers, doctors, judges, I mean, you name it, business professionals. They would mentor these kids for 4 years of high school. My job was to run that entire program. And I tell all my friends who are pastors now, literally, I was just like a glorified AY director, because, I mean, you're just planning programming, you
Sure.
are, mentoring, coaching, all that stuff. But it was a really great job. And I got to kind of see the other side of nonprofit work, because faith-based work is nonprofit work, right? Like when you're running a church, you are running a non-for-profit. It was just a more secular based type of situation.
Right.
Now, I mean, those experiences really help prepare me for what I believe is just the perfect job for me in this season of my life. I work as the director of programs for Chicago Debates. And in this role, I've kind of taken a step back, if you would, from the direct constituent, which is our students, and now
Right.
I'm working with teachers. Well, I work with my staff who works with teachers. So we have the largest urban policy debate league in the country. So we
Wow.
have upwards to about 1,700 students participating in policy debate. Policy debate is a very rigorous form of debate. There's many different types. And in this role, what I get to do is help train those teachers to effectively support those students. So
Okay.
you're really kind of taking all of that perspective from working directly with kids to even pastoring, because that's very admin level, and kind of culminating in all to one into one role. So I'm building a staff who very much young professionals right out of college, helping them learn how to use their gifts, helping them navigate difficult decisions and conflict resolution and confrontation, all of those things, while also supporting our teachers, about 95 to 150 of them, to support students, Chicago public school students, inner city students who have stuff going on, right? And we all know what stuff is. So
Yeah.
that's the work that I do. I very much see it as ministry. And I don't know what's next, right? But I do know that right now, I can see like how God was taking the VOT experience, right? When I was directing the choir, or the DMC experience, the Oakwood, I see it all culminating to these points. And I feel like that happens all the time. No, you're not going to use everything, but I'm one of those believers that nothing is wasted. Everything has a purpose, and God will use it the way that he needs to make sure that you're successful in your current season.
I definitely think that I agree with this notion that nothing is wasted. If all things work together for the good of them who love the Lord and are the called
Mm.
according to his purposes, then that means a trial isn't wasted, a failure isn't wasted. You know, when we bump our heads, it's not wasted. Successes, experiences, opportunities. And so as you were sharing where you are now, again, I was just kind of going through the memory reel of all of our experiences together, at Oakwood, to Andrews, back to Oakwood, and seeing, yeah, it's amazing. Voices of Triumph was not known contextually now.
Yes.
In the community of Oakwood, VOT was not known at the time we were there,
Mm-hmm.
to be kind of what we might call a premier choir.
Yeah.
It was one of those, you know, make a joyful noise choir, right? You know, anybody who
Worship
wants
with your heart.
just sing along with us, everybody, right? You listened to the Aeolians, you listened to dynamic praise, but you know, you might have to sing along with VOT. So then Anthony doesn't come and just join UC, and but he said, okay, I'm going to get the chance to learn from, you know, who is now the director of the world, right?
Of the
Jason
world.
Max Ferdinand. I'm going to watch everything he does. I'm going to become his mentee. And
Mhm.
then I'm going to actively apply these principles to a choir that other people would say, there's no way in the world I would go and try my hand. Man, I don't know when it was, but it was 1AY, you know, please welcome VOT, you know, all right, you know. And then people were like, whoa, like what has happened, right? And so I think you're right, from VOT to DMC coming back. I love that you never shirked at an opportunity to develop other people. I genuinely believe that leaders develop other leaders.
Yeah,
And in doing that, you hone your own leadership acumen. And
that's
so
it.
here it is now. You could not see and did not see Peak or Chicago debates way back then. So I think it speaks to this idea of not trying to always see beyond what you see in the moment.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm directing VOT and I'm giving it all. Right now, I'm directing DMC. Right now, for me, I'm pastoring the church where I'm pastoring, right? For me, if I had to kind of draw some inspiration from my own 2020, so birthday was in November, I turned 32 years old. This birthday was special, not because, you know, 32 is in the grand scheme of society a special year, but for me, it was significant in the context of 2020. And I learned that sometimes I can be so over there,
Mm.
so future oriented, so what's next, that I am not fully here in the moment.
Yeah.
And so I began literally practicing the here-ness and now-ness of my life, right? That, hey, that's going to be there, but you don't want to get there and realize once you're there, man, I didn't get something here because I
Yeah.
was so, you know, I'm trying to, you know, and you and I talked before we started recording. I'm in school right now, and please believe I can taste and feel and smell and see and sense graduation and finishing. But you know, it's like, hey man, some journeys you only get to go through once.
Yeah.
Don't rush it. Glean it for what it's worth. So I love how you're able to say, hey, I can see it all coming together. And this is still just another point in my journey. Who knows what's next? Who knows what's coming down the line? But what I am going to do is, as I've been entrusted with the opportunity to pour into my staff, who pour into teachers, who pour into students, I know I'm here on purpose.
Yeah.
So one definition of ministry, or one of the objectives of ministry, I think, in any expression that it comes in, is character development. As pastors, we use various means and we encourage various systems toward that end. Of course, as pastors, we know preaching and teaching is a part of that. You also now know what it's like to really be hands-on in developing the characters of young people. For you, what is character? And how do you go about inspiring that development in young people?
Yeah, I love that. I always try to explain that by explaining what it's not. So for me, like character is not personality, right? Like it's not like how charming you are or
Right.
how you can turn on in front of people. But I think character is who you are when no one's watching.
Mm-hmm.
It is the consistency of your being, right? Like how you feel about people when you don't have the pressure of an outside audience to feel a certain way.
Wow.
I think that's what character is, like who you are at your truest self. And I do think that it can be built, it can be amended, it can be worked on, because I do think that we all have character flaws. I know I do.
Same.
And it may be in the way that we treat people or think about people. Maybe we don't say it to them. It may be the way that we treat our family members. I think it can reveal itself in many ways. I think the key here is having an honest enough sense of self-awareness to be able to recognize where those flaws are and be willing to, one, hold ourselves accountable, but two, allow the people that God has placed in our lives, that may be your spouse, that may be some of your friends, to also help you develop as a person. And I think that's also a key to asking yourselves about the people who are in your circle, right? We pray that your wife or your husband is, a good person because you're with them hopefully for life. But some of us may have friends who may not be interested in helping us develop. And I think we have to, as individuals, assess the value that we place on people in our lives, the positions that we put them in, because I truly do believe that your potential for success will be based off of your environment, the breeding ground.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Because if you don't have the right cast of supporters, right, you can have those people who will ride or die. They with you whether you right or wrong. But you also need that person who's going to say, bro or sis, I'm so annoyed with you right now. I love you, but why did you do that? And kind of help you get to where you need to be. I'm telling you, that's where true significance happens. And I've been trying to be intentional about using the word significance versus success. But I think that's where it really happens, where you start to really, I don't know, hit that sweet spot in your life. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily mean that you may always love what you're doing at the time, but it will mean that, like, when you are you're operating at your highest level of excellence. You are giving your best to the Lord. You are being your kindest and your truest self at all times. There is no mask. There is no imposter syndrome. You're just kind of grooving and doing what you do. I think that all has to do with your character, but I think in a greater sense has to do with your awareness of it and the people that you help get you to that place.
Sure. So let's talk about accountability then, because I do believe that our community is instrumental in us achieving significance in life. I want to reframe how I originally wanted to pose the question by asking it this way. Why do we at times struggle with being held accountable?
Ooh, man. I can only talk about me, and I think this is going to be a goal for 2021. I think accountability breeds vulnerability, right? So it's like you have to, especially when you've asked someone else to be a part of that journey.
Yeah.
Many times you have to admit to them that you are failing and that you aren't doing it, right? Like, it can be laziness, it can be procrastination, it can be doubt. And a lot of times we tend to procrastinate, doubt, or just plain out give up because On the other side of the unknown for us is fear, right? Or better yet, the unknown breeds like this anxiousness that we don't like approaching. It's like the movie when you're watching, like you put the cover over your head because like you're building up so much tension that you're not sure that on the other side of that tension everything's going to be all right. But many times, right, whether you have the cover over your head or not, the movie continues to play, you're still alive, your heart rate goes down, you're going to be okay. I think the same thing is true for having an accountability partner as it relates to anything you're doing in your life. That person is the one that's kind of building some tension in your life, right? Because maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's your spouse, so it's every single day. You're going to be called to account for what you said you would do.
Yeah.
And though it's something that is uncomfortable, because I think being vulnerable makes us uncomfortable. It is something that we as humans, not Christians, not professionals, just human beings, we have to embrace it. I think that's what makes the world a better place. Like when you think about your elected official, right? They've been in the news lately, right? And we think about the corruption that lies in politics.
Definitely.
It lies there because a lot of times people get power, and once they get power, they make themselves more. They become more motivated to holding on to the power than it is holding themselves accountable to their constituents or the people. So when the power or the pomp of it all becomes the reason why you're there, then you don't have to think about how your actions affect other people. You only have to think about you, right? So when you're telling someone, I don't need an accountability partner, what you're really saying to yourself is that I am so selfish that I will only hold myself accountable to me and not care about how my actions or my actions lack thereof will affect other people. Being accountable or having an accountability partner is an embrace of community, if you would, right? Like it's an embrace of recognizing that like you are here for a purpose that's larger than yourself, right? And I think when people, when companies, when organizations, when they operate that way with and with a responsibility to their constituents, to who, whatever that end result is, I think better or more responsible decisions are made. But as individuals, I think we eventually become what we're supposed to be, right? Like we get there because that person's not only there to tell you you didn't do it, but they're also there to celebrate you when you do it, right? Like, and also to help you see it from a vantage point that you are unable to see it, because none of us can see things 360, right? Like we see it in our viewpoint. And if we're not intentional about asking folks to share so that our scope is widened, then you always end up being a flawed leader, a flawed husband, a flawed wife, a flawed friend, because you are only allowing yourself to see things through your lens. And nobody wants to be paired with a person like that, because again, I think it boils down to them always seeing it their way. So I could go on and on about that, but I think that's the way I would explain it.
Yeah. And I resonate with a lot of what you shared, and I know others will as well, in that a part of why we kind of might have a apprehension about accountability in all of the ways in which it can be provided is because at times we do wrestle with feedback.
Yeah.
And so if your challenge is receiving difficult feedback, constructive feedback, even if it is constructive, rather, you can turn yourself off from affirmation, celebration, and encouragement just because you're afraid of hearing the critique and the suggestion of how you can change, right?
Yeah.
That accountability doesn't just bring one, it brings both. Yeah. But in fear or out of concern for one, you can actually cancel out both. And so it becomes even more interesting when you think of this principle of it's not good for man or human being to try to navigate life on his or her own. I think that's a part of it, that our communal nurturing does not just end whenever we say leave our parents' house, get a home of our own, but that going through, you still need accountability. You need to be able to lend your ear toward feedback. My wife raised this question to me the other day, and we were having a conversation along these lines of accountability and of just personal development. You know, both of us are committed to pursuing wholeness, and a part of that pursuit includes accountability. And so she said, that she was a part of a business session in which this question was raised, I guess kind of as an icebreaker. And so she threw it my way to kind of spawn a conversation between us. And she was like, when was the last time someone told you you were wrong?
Mm.
Now, you know, as a pastor, level one of that leadership post is positional leadership, to use John Maxwell's levels, right? You're installed and you are the person. So what comes with that at times is this, and it can often be an unspoken expectation on the part of parishioners in my context, and even on the part of myself as a pastor, who is there to tell you you're wrong? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so you could easily become accustomed to that. And it takes great intentionality to build a different environment. And so I'll give a case in point, and this is not self-aggrandizement, it's to illustrate the journey of getting to this point. We had the chance to do an outdoor memorial service for one of our members who unfortunately passed away this year. Couldn't do it inside the church building for obvious reasons. So we were able to, before the weather broke, do it outdoors. Got with the elders, developed the outline of service, and the clouds began to come over the parking lot. And so we were concerned about the weather. So we began to kind of expedite things, cutting, removing, you know how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
And in my haste to make sure we ended in a reasonable time and manner, I unintentionally and accidentally forgot that one of the elders was slotted to do the prayer of benediction. So I did it, closed out, may God be with you all, and everyone left. I'm driving home, and you know how it is, like, boom, it hits me. Oh no.
Yep.
The elder was standing right next to me. He was there, and I completely forgot. I called him right away. I said, Elder, please charge it to my head, not my heart. I forgot. I'm so sorry. And he said, it's okay, Pastor. Fast forward a couple of days, we were in another meeting together. And I guess at this time he became a little bit more comfortable. Pastor, I really was kind of disappointed. I was kind of hurt. I get the sense that he wanted to participate in the service.
Mm-hmm.
This is a member that was near and dear to all of us. And I said again, Elder, I'm so sorry. But I also said this. I said, listen, I want us all to be comfortable being able to share with one another if we felt slighted or if we feel away. I want you all to be able to know you have the open door to put your hand on my shoulder and say, hey, Pastor, this is what we decided to do, whether it's in a programmatic standpoint, whether it's in the greater system of our mission as a church.
Mm-hmm.
Don't feel as though if I make a judgment call that I'm beyond follow up to say, hey, did you see that? Right? Because I'm limited in that way. I'm thankful for that, because for me, I think that if that same situation had happened, say when I first arrived at this church, with all the insecurities that can come when you're pastoring for yourself, merging with your own expectations of what it should look like, I don't know if I would have been able to as readily own up to that publicly. I mean, other people were listening. I said, yo, I'm so sorry. And I dropped the ball on this one. No, going forward, you've got access and open doors. This is what we do. And so that's a long illustration, but I just wanted to share that to say, yeah, I think you can grow to become, just like character can be honed and developed, we can grow to have accountability as more of a feature of our lives. And it doesn't have to be something we're afraid of, but the perspective can shift and say, hey, yo, a part of me becoming my best self includes having accountability from various angles and areas.
Yeah. Wow. No, I love that. I like the idea of the maturity of it all. Because what you explained is something I am struggling with currently with my wife. Like, she'll tell me all the time, hey, babe, you will, like, someone will tell you something that I've already told you, but when I told you it, you got defensive, right? Like, like, hey, maybe you should blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, you don't get it, right? Like, blah, blah, blah. And then someone else says, hey, Aunt, you should probably, I'm like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. And she says, for her, she's like, I think you're not listening, right? Like, like, you're hearing me, but a part of you automatically gets defensive without hearing what I'm saying. I say all that to say that maybe 6 months ago, when we had that conversation, I still wasn't able to hear it, right? So there was still some defensiveness to it. To maybe this week, when we have the conversation, it's like, hey, sweetie, you're right. I apologize. I am clearly still struggling with it. So you may have to remind me some more. But I think it's also like being honest with yourself that, like, this may happen again, folks. I'm not there yet. And as much, you know, especially when you're in a marriage, like I need, you have to let your spouse know that I also need the grace, right? Like I think a lot of times we have expectations for people that once we tell them, they'll correct it. And a lot of times, you know, we're flawed, we're human. So giving people the grace to still mess up, and being patient enough or long suffering enough to continue to remind and remind. I know that's a struggle that I have with my staff. I'll say, hey guys, this is our protocol for this. They won't do it, right? I'm
Right.
just like, Lord Jesus, help me, right? And just recognizing, one, that they're young, and that
Sure.
these early experiences are going to shape how they lead their own teams, right? Like, and just kind of trying to have that type of responsibility with how you help people become their best selves.
Sure. So, speaking of accountability, you kind of alluded to it already. One type of relationship in which accountability is both necessary, whether we want it or not, is marriage, you
Yeah.
know? So I had different ways that I wanted to approach this. So I'll come at it like this. You and I are married, right? So let's
Mhm.
put that on the table, right?
Yes, sir.
But we do live in a world, maybe even a sphere. I wouldn't say the whole globe, but definitely in the West and in our generation, more and more, people are saying, "Yeah, what's the
Hmm.
point?" Right?
Yeah.
So, is marriage outdated? Is there a certain picture of marriage that's outdated? And it's kind of a strange question to raise as a married man to another married man, but
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? There are people who are listening who are kind of like, that's it's antiquated. Like, why? So if it's not outdated, what's the value? What's the point? What's the rationale, especially where like maybe older definitions or rationales aren't necessarily always as applicable now? So it used to be, right? Oh, you have better economic advancement opportunities if you have
Hmm.
two incomes instead of one, right?
Yeah.
Well, we know 21-year-old entrepreneurs who are doing very well by themselves, right?
Yeah, they're good.
So, so I won't even give any more, qualifiers to it. You can come at it however you want to.
Yeah. Ah, man, this one's hard. I think it's a really good question. While you were talking, I think what did come to mind is just kind of reshaping it, because I think if you grew up in a Christian context, you understood marriage as a necessity to um, just being with someone, right? Like
Mhm.
physically, emotionally living with them. Um, that was the ultimate step you would take. But I think in this post-Christian world, one that definitely doesn't necessarily lean towards a lot of traditions as much as our elders would. Even though I appreciate a lot of those traditions, I would say I think really trying to get to the core of why um, the commitment is important, right? Like, or at least that's the way that I would approach it. I think marriage is the ultimate sacrifice you're making to one another, and you're saying like, hey,
Wow.
I am committing myself only to you, and not
Mm.
just in like I'm not going to sleep with somebody else, but that my passions, my purpose will become a conjunction, if you would. Like we will become, there will be one purpose in a way. Like
Mm.
um one of my good friends, they're an older couple, marriage friends. His name's Adrian Langdon. And Adrian and his wife talk about how they have realized that God has given them a joint purpose as a married couple, and that their highest level of effectiveness is when they say, "Hey, I have an idea, or God has given me this vision. Let me talk it through with you and see if that also aligns with what God has shown you, to find out if that works together for us as a unit." And I personally believe that when you do move in lockstep with your husband and with your wife, that you are just doubly more powerful, right? Like you make double the impact. And again, I think perspective is everything. And it just I don't know. I'm rambling here, but I think just like that idea of knowing that there is kind of like that power in community, that
Yeah.
God never intended it for us to be alone. So recognizing that once God is giving, because marriage also is a gift, right? Like, so once he's giving you the person, they saying, hey, this is your person. I think marriage to you is almost like an acceptance of that gift from God, saying, God, I am now going to nurture and develop and cherish this gift. protect this gift, and develop it so that when you come again, right, or when I breathe my final breath and I have to give an account for my life, I can say, this is what you gave us in the beginning. Now, this is what we've done with it, right? We've multiplied it, right? Like, and it's one could say, oh, we had kids, but there's other ways, right? Everybody doesn't become parents, but there are other ways to multiply, the impact of your marriage as a team. So I don't know. That's a deep one, because I think there's other ways we could approach that, but that's just one response.
And I think even in providing just one response helps to already kind of change the perspective and the mindset on marriage, because I think for those who might espouse this idea that it's antiquated, it's an old, outdated model, it was traditional in the past for various reasons, times have changed, seasons have changed. And I also think we have to say this, some people actually also speak with broken marriages in their rear view. In other words, they're saying, listen, when I think of the word marriage, I don't think of a cute picture, right? Yeah. So I also can look to my left or my right and see those who aren't married who seem to have a more admirable relationship. So I think you're right that that's a way to look at it, but there are other ways to look at it as well. And you've shared one of them. I will say this in my reading as of late. So for me, this year, another thing that kind of was dropped on me, there's a book called Manhood Restored, rather. Mm-hmm. And there's this idea in there for husbands, particularly, to become students of their wives. So they say, the author suggests that when we get married, at times we can think it's graduation, but marriage is actually entrance into school for a lifetime. So you've actually got to become a student of your spouse. Yeah. Like you might know a bit about her as your fiance, her as your girlfriend, her as your friend, but you are just now beginning that, graduate program of her as your wife. And as strange as it might sound, and my wife and I tell people all the time, like, you can hear a lot about marriage, read a lot about it, learn a lot about it, but man, there's just no substitute for being in a marriage, right? Yeah. And it's a very healthy thing to think about. What I mean by that is, it's healthy to think about it. So I'm not saying just go and get married so you can know what it's like. No, think about it. But there's no substitute for the actual experience. So in other words, he said, be a student of your wife. So in my pursuit of becoming a student of her, I've also learned that it requires perseverance. Mm-hmm. So Gary Thomas, in his book, Sacred Marriage, same guy who wrote Sacred Parenting, he talks about this idea that, marriage is the development of a sacred history. And that at times when it gets tough, and it inevitably will, so many people can check out. Now, I'll be honest, I probably had all kinds of ideals in my mind before I was married about marriage, right? Mm-hmm. Like, man, people just be quitting and giving up. Here I am, I'm as single as all get out, right? Never been married before. And you've got all of these, critiques and at times criticisms and just, you really see everything in a certain light. Well, when you're married, you still continue to do that, but you now have experience to say, okay, wow, this is not easy. It's work, it's good work. At times it's hard work, but that word persevere, coupled with the accountability that we've been talking about and the sacredness of receiving the gift and growing the gift, man, to use kind of a familiar parable, the parable of the talents, 1, 2, 5, mm-hmm. right? The 5 doubled it, the 2 doubled it, the 1 dug a hole and buried it. Yep. I think a part of, and this is a Richard Martin-ism, right? A part of me, I feel like the guy with 1, man, he just didn't, he thought about the work that would be required for an unknown outcome. Like, I don't know if this is going to double. So instead, I'm just going to bury it. I think at times to maybe stretch and apply it to marriage, at times it's easy to be like, man, the perseverance that's required to really see this thing grow over time. Yeah. I think that also can lead people away from it and say, I don't want that kind of, what you mean, a lifetime commitment? What else in my life has that kind of thing to it? Like, we have great jobs, we could leave a job, right? Yeah. But this whole notion of, hey, you're in it for the long haul. But I do think that, and I won't assume for you, well, I think I know where you would say, but I want to ask you, I'll say for myself, I can say I'm not the same Richard the day I said I do now. Yeah. Would you relate to that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I'm not the same. I tell this to people all the time. I don't even think I knew my wife, right? Like, I knew her enough to make my commitment. I knew her character, but the woman that she is, oh man, And there's been many times in marriage, like people always say lines like, "Oh, marriage is hard," or they say, "Well, everybody says everything." And I think there is no way to really share your experience in a way that can be completely applicable to somebody else's, because every person, it's like a snowflake. They're so unique. And I think it's just a consistent commitment to intentionality.
Cool.
Being intentional with forgiveness, being intentional with loving your spouse, right? Like my body has changed, right? Like I'm not the skinny person I used to be. I put on some weight, right? Like her body has changed, right? Like some days I want to do something with my hair, right? Maybe my breath stink, whatever the case may be, right? Like there's just you get so close. Like the idea of oneness, I'm starting to slowly understand now.
Yeah.
Because like I think I'm to that point where I can see where someone who doesn't want to make the commitment, but they've already done it, right? Like how divorces, better yet, what I'm saying is I can see how divorces sometimes take place, not all of them. Because there is that consistent commitment that you have to make that can sometimes be extremely tough. When you have your own stuff going on, maybe when things are not just flowing the way, because we say, like you see younger couples and they don't work out, boyfriend, girlfriends, and say, oh, they just change so much and we're so different. You're changing forever. That's happening. If you're getting married in your 20s at some point or your 30s, you're still changing. And sometimes the friction of that change doesn't people don't survive it, right? Like, and you never get to make that readjustment. And mind you, I've only been married about 2.5 years, almost 3 years. But I'm even in our short time of marriage, we've been able to see like, wow, okay, I get now that my frustration wasn't really even with you as much as it was with, I didn't understand you and you didn't understand me. And we need to take some time to understand each other. And that's why I always appreciate people say consistently, married folks should always be getting counseling. They should always be talking to somebody. Because you're going through so much. And I think you add that as being a Black person in America or a Black man in America, to have to show up, right, for your family is a task. And I take my hat off to every married couple I see that's continually, I mean, the newest to the oldest, because that is not an easy feat to really become one with someone, people who are committed to that. And I know that's what I want. I really want Laura and I to be one. And it's going to take a lot of work, but we've been enjoying doing it. And I think, just being honest with ourselves at where we are has been a huge help, because we are not where we were on May 20th, 2018. But, praise God, we're still together. And I think we'll be together until the Lord comes, or until, they put me in the ground.
I agree, brother. Well, let's end where we began. If you had to summarize your aspirations for 2021 in one word, what is that word? 2020 was refocus. What's 2021?
Yeah, I have a word for 2021, and it's audacity. I think for me, I think this year has been a Sabbath. And you think about like the Old Testament, how they would have these special Sabbaths. Maybe it'd be a week, maybe it'd be this year is the Sabbath, whatever the case. And for me, I felt like this was a Sabbath year. I didn't travel and preach. The year before, I traveled and preached so much, and I was looking forward to expanding, right? So no traveling, no special engagements for real, a few here and there, but really just quiet time, staying in my house, and hanging out with my wife every single day, right? Which surprisingly was amazing. I think we both were nervous in the beginning, but now it's like, this last month, God has just given me so much vision for the next year. And my challenge to myself is to really prepare myself in a strategic way to accomplish all of those things. But greater than that, to be unafraid to really try some stuff out. I'm real big on trying to build some generational wealth, not just for myself, but for my race, right? Like, as an African American, I want to significantly be able to impact my family and my community. And I think I'm just getting started career-wise. And I think that requires for me I have a great boss right now. So really like being intentional about learning everything that I can from her, and being intentional about being excellent on the job. So I don't know. I'm really excited. I would just say, to people who follow me or listen to my podcast or support me, whatever the case may be, to one, pray for me. I appreciate prayers all the time, but just know that this year I'm gonna be grinding the whole 365, or I don't know if it's a leap year, so maybe 366. I can't tell you. But yeah, it's about just being audacious to just try my hand at a few things to see what happens. Because I think after that, there's some other cool things that could happen in the future. So yeah.
Share with us about the Embolden podcast and what listeners can expect to encounter as they hear you.
Yeah. So the Embolden podcast is very much what I do with my life, right? It's a podcast for individuals who are seeking motivation. You're seeking wisdom from others so that you can go and live your life the way that you want to and feel called to. So the purpose is to really equip you with the skills, right? And we do that by asking individuals who've been there and done that to come and share their story, to share their journey with you. I share my story and the lessons that I've learned and am learning in my life. And I think it's been a really great opportunity, especially for young professionals or people in transition moments in our lives. I found that is my audience. That like, if you feel like you're about to make a pivot, then I would invite you to listen to the show. If you feel like people who are about to leave college, the safety net of academia, and enter into the work life or workplace, I think this is a good podcast for you. So yeah, man, I thank you, Rich. I thank you for joining on. I definitely will be asking you again. But I would definitely say check out Richard's podcast. You say something about fear on that episode. I'll never forget it. It's in the first season, maybe episode 7 or 8. And you were talking about how fear is irrational because it has nothing to base itself on. I will never forget that. So no, I appreciate you.
I can listen to that episode myself.
It's a good one, man. Please listen to it. I listen. There's nothing wrong with listening to yourself. You're a motivating person. So like, definitely go listen to it. It's good. But I appreciate it, Rich.
Not a problem at all. And listen, man, thank you for hanging out with us here in the living room. Again, thank you for not finding it robbery to pour into me as I was seeking to get this off of the ground. And so this is a part of season 2. So I'm excited to say that.
Hey, let's go.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Hey, listen, for those watching and listening, thank you for hanging out with us in the living room. If you just kind of peeked your head in, caught a little bit, appreciate you. If you caught the whole conversation, thank you. Wherever you watched from, please feel free to share this. We ask kindly that you would subscribe so that others might have a chance to hang out with us and receive inspiration as we listen, learn, and live together. Before we go, Anthony, would you share with us your social media handles so the folk can follow you, rap with you, engage with you, and see what you're doing?
Yeah, mainly Instagram is my main one. So at Bolden _leads, LEADS, or you can follow me at Embolden Podcast if you want to check out the podcast.
Awesome. Hey, listen, go check out my boy, Anthony Bolden. This is just a foretaste, a small sample of what God is doing in his life. And we're looking forward to the next time. We're going to have you back. As you said, there were some points where we had to kind of reel it in the interest of time, but we're going to have a part 2 and just kind of check in with one another and see what further lessons we can discuss together and share with others, my man.
Yeah, thank you.
No doubt. Well, listen, that's all we have for this episode of The Living Room. We're looking forward to all that this year has in store for you and for one another. Until next time, I'm your host, Richard Martin. Our special guest has been Anthony Bolden Jr. We'll see you next time.